If all we have are transformative practices, we might be missing out on the beauty of what is. In Jewish spirituality, the world itself, every physical part of this world is like a doorway to what lies beyond. And most of the time, most human beings aren't necessarily approaching it in that way, but being a very embodied householder path, Jewish mysticism has understood throughout the ages that each moment, each physical component of the universe, each spiritual practice or ethical action can be a doorway into connection to God or to that which lies beyond. In fact, there are articulations of every single mitzvah, every single ritual act or commandment that's given in the Torah to show how each of them can be one of these doorways. Some of them are more ritualistic, you could say, or more contemplative. That would be, for example, saying prayers. In Jewish custom, prayers are said out of the Siddur, the prayer book, 3 times per day. And it's possible to say these prayers very quickly in a rote fashion, but it's also possible to slow down and say them in a meditative way. And in fact, there's a very old quote from about 1800 years ago in the Mishnah that says the original pious ones used to wait for an hour before saying the central prayer, and then say the central prayer for an hour, and then take an hour afterwards to come down, in a sense. It's often understood that this was a form of meditation, that if you were to say that central prayer called the Amidah very slowly, you'd be saying one word every several seconds and entering in or creating a possibility in which you could enter in to some kind of altered state or connected place. So these are prayers that are opportunities to connect. One of many examples, and some of the examples that are given are much more everyday. For example, giving charity, an act of kindness, an act of mercy, an act of compassion. These are good in and of themselves in the sense that you're helping somebody, you're offering a lending hand or money or food or whatever it is, shelter. But also there are descriptions of the spiritual power that can be tapped into through acts like giving charity to those who are in need. It is both seen as an ethical action, a ritual action in a sense as well, like a sacred action that's spelled out by the religion, but also a doorway to what lies beyond. And there's lots of stories about holy encounters with people who are down and out. You give them money, for example, or help them or give them food or give them shelter, and they, in various stories, are revealing secrets, or they're saying, God bless you, and the power of that blessing can be really impactful. These different kinds of gateways, everything being a different possible doorway to transcendence and connection, are discussed in mystical writings, such as the Me'or, that's this page on the right, a teaching from the 18th century Hasidic master known as the Chernobyler Rebbe, or the Me'or, the Illumination of the Eyes was the name of this book. It's featured in a book of mine called Embodied Kabbalah, and this teaching essentially divides up into 2 categories: the types of spirituality and the types of spiritual doorways that are possible. This rabbi himself lived in Chernobyl, Ukraine, hundreds of years ago, and wrote a commentary on the Torah in which, among many other things, he describes this dynamic between the work week and Shabbat consciousness. We have this image here. This is positive spirituality. This is positive mysticism. If somebody is in a bad mood on a very simple level and they get transported magically to this viewpoint, there's going to be most likely some positive feelings that are being cultivated. This is associated with the idea of celebration and gratitude and a direct positive cultivation. So Shabbat, the Jewish day of rest, which happens 1 day a week classically, is also a time when it's acknowledged, or at least the goal is to feel and acknowledge that the world is as it should be. There's nothing left to repair. There's nothing broken in that mindset. And so from that place, a Shabbat style of practice aims to go towards the good. And there's many different examples of this that can be found, but you can imagine something that makes you feel good in the smallest sense that goes directly towards that feeling. Something that helps towards relaxation or calm or happiness. And on the other side of things, this is the Workweek consciousness. This is the acknowledgement that things are not whole. There is brokenness in the world. This is what could be deemed negative mysticism or Workweek consciousness, Workweek practices in which there is a striving for transformation. On Shabbat, there's nothing to strive for because everything's complete. That's the idea. Now, one does not have to do a Shabbat practice on Shabbat, so to speak, but these categories, one says everything is great, I'm going to celebrate. And the other one says there's something broken here. There's something that needs to be transformed, whether it's myself or the world or both. And in fact, in this dynamic, both are needed. It's not adequate to have either Shabbat practices on their own or Workweek practices on their own. If all we have is gratitude and blissful cultivation, we're not in tune yet with some of the harsher realities of the world. How can we have compassion for someone if we don't acknowledge their situation? How can we have compassion for ourselves? How can we work on ourselves and acknowledge we are not yet perfect if we do not acknowledge that there is something misaligned that needs improvement? And on the other hand, if all we have are transformative practices of this negative mysticism, negative contemplation, if all we are doing constantly is seeking to change and grow and transform, we might be missing out on the beauty of what is, or we might be burning ourselves out. There is something innately satisfying and quenching, refreshing about resting in everything that is and celebrating, or at least accepting what currently exists as good in and of itself or as adequate. So when we put these together, this forms two different pathways that allow for a mystical or a meditative or a balance of self-inquiry. And this is a very central dichotomy and dynamic in the Jewish way of life. So what does Shabbat look like? A positive practice, Shabbat consciousness. Let's take a look. This is something like dancing or celebration. This is eating delicious food, believe it or not, is a mystical practice in Judaism, that if we can really enjoy a meal, it's said that that's like if there's a river or a spring and we're trying to have more of it flow, you actually are, it's like you're taking away some of the edges of the river to create a new stream, or you're digging out the well a bit more so water keeps flowing. That's when we appreciate the bounty in this world, so goes one Hasidic teaching, that actually encourages more blessings to flow. Delicious food, celebration, resting, napping actually, and singing a song, a joyful song, or doing a type of meditation where we're visualizing something really good, something really positive. These are all examples of relatively everyday positive practices. And I'm articulating here this, it's not something that you have to go a roundabout way towards to get to the positive experience. It's something that's you're shooting towards, you're aiming towards. In fact, the word Torah means to aim or to point to a line, as well as it means teaching, but you're going towards something positive. Similarly, when people wake up in the morning, there's a prayer that's said called the Modeh Ani, or the Moda'ani, where it's a gratitude prayer, or some people see it as a surrendering prayer, but it's an appreciation to mark the beginning of the day. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, says that when we first wake up in the morning, we're like a clay that hasn't formed yet. And if we can stamp ourselves as something positive or grateful, it can set us for the rest of the day. It's not that we're waking up first thing in the morning and we're asking, what's lacking here? It's more that we're inserting an intention for the day of gratitude for what we have to set ourselves up in that direction. In that same vein, there are songs that people sing on their own or in groups that are not meant to tap into the sorrow of the universe or to what's lacking. They're joyful melodies that people join in together. This is what is meant when I say Shabbat consciousness cultivation or positive mysticism. The other side is about contending with the brokenness of the world. This is a shattered clay pot. One of the dominant Kabbalistic metaphors from Lurianic Kabbalah describes the universe as initially having a phase in which everything was aligning, but the vessels or clay pots in this metaphor, which were supposed to be containing divine light to pass it on and gradually build the world, they broke. And so the job of the Lurianic Kabbalist is to, using specific meditations paired with actions, to actually piece the spiritual world back together, and in the process heal the physical world as well. It's where the term tikkun olam is fleshed out most fully in the ancient world. It's this idea of repairing the world. And that's different than Shabbat consciousness, than positive mysticism, because it acknowledges from the get-go that there's something that needs to be fixed. We contend with these shards, these klipot as they're called. Again, a word that means shards in Hebrew, but in mystical circles specifically means negativity or evil or even the demonic, that there's something that is misaligned that needs to be put back into its proper place. This looks like self-transformation as well, world transformation, but also we are in these two paths simultaneously whole, and simultaneously we're all a work in progress. There's always something that we can be improving upon. And so the attitude of the Workweek Consciousness says, what am I lacking? What can I contend with today, as opposed to what can I celebrate? Whether it's contending with a broken world or contending with a broken heart.